The morning I discovered my snow blower was apparently a federal offense, according to Margaret from the HOA. I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning with coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, staring at an email that made me question whether I'd accidentally moved into a prison camp instead of the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm Robert Vance, and I've lived in this neighborhood for 3 years now. I bought my modest 3-bedroom colonial right after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a quiet community would be exactly what I needed. The house had good bones, a decent yard, and most importantly, it was mine. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time of purchase was that living in an HOA community meant every single aspect of my existence would be subject to the approval of people who apparently had nothing better to do than measure the height of my grass and count how many seconds my Christmas lights stayed up past New Year's. The email read, "Dear Mr. Vance, it has come to the attention of the Riverside Meadows HOA board that you have been operating a gas-powered snow removal device at an excessive rate of speed during morning hours. Per Section 14.7 of the Community Bylaws, all snow removal equipment must be operated at a reasonable pace to minimize noise disturbance and maintain the aesthetic quality of snow removal within the community. Your current method creates an unacceptable noise level and results in snow being expelled in an irregular pattern that does not meet community standards. Please adjust your snow removal practices immediately or face potential fines. Sincerely, Margaret Pemberton, HOA President." I read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated my still half-asleep brain. My snow blower was too fast. Too fast. I looked at the machine sitting in my garage, a perfectly normal Toro model that I'd purchased from Home Depot 2 winters ago. It had one speed, the speed it came with. The speed that literally thousands of people across Michigan used to clear their driveways every winter. I took a long drink of my coffee and tried to process this new level of absurdity. During my 3 years in Riverside Meadows, I'd received notices about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, my garden gnome being visible from the street, and my car being parked in my own driveway for more than 48 hours without moving. But this was a new record. The thing was, we'd just gotten hit with 8 inches of snow overnight, and more was forecast for the weekend. I had to get my driveway clear before heading to work at the engineering firm downtown. I couldn't just leave it. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Derek, who lived 2 subdivisions over in a non-HOA neighborhood where people were apparently still allowed to live like free citizens. "You're not going to believe this," I said when he answered. "It's 6 in the morning, Rob. This better be good. The HOA says my snow blower is too fast." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. Margaret sent me an email saying I'm operating my snow removal equipment at excessive speed and it doesn't meet aesthetic standards." Derek started laughing so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. When he finally calmed down, he said, "Man, I keep telling you to move out of that crazy place. What are you going to do?" "I have no idea. I guess I'll go talk to her." "Good luck. That woman is insane." He wasn't wrong. Margaret Pemberton was 52 years old, had perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move regardless of weather conditions, and wore pastel-colored blazers like they were battle armor. She'd been HOA president for 6 years, and in that time had managed to make the lives of every single resident measurably worse. She had a particular talent for finding problems where none existed, and then creating elaborate rules to address those imaginary problems. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and headed over to Margaret's house, which was naturally the largest and most ostentatious property in the subdivision. It was a sprawling 5-bedroom monstrosity with white columns and a circular driveway. Her snow had already been cleared, probably by the landscaping service she used year-round. I rang the doorbell and waited. Margaret answered wearing a pink blazer and pearl earrings. At 6:30 in the morning. Who does that? Robert, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of condescension she'd perfected. I assume you received my email. I did. That's why I'm here. Margaret, I need to understand what you mean by my snow blower being too fast. It has one speed, the speed it came with. She pursed her lips. Robert, the issue isn't the machine itself, it's how you're using it. You're clearly rushing through the process, creating noise and throwing snow in an unsightly manner. Mrs. Patterson across the street called me yesterday morning at 6:05 to complain about the noise. The Hendersons said snow from your driveway landed on their lawn. Margaret, it's a snow blower. That's what it does. It blows snow. Where exactly am I supposed to put the snow if not on the lawn? You need to be more mindful of your neighbors. Perhaps if you operated the equipment more slowly, walked at a more reasonable pace, the noise would be reduced and the snow would be distributed more evenly. I stood there on her perfectly cleared front step, trying to wrap my head around this logic. You want me to walk slower while using my snow blower, precisely. I'm glad we understand each other. Margaret, that's insane. The machine runs at the same speed regardless of how fast I walk. Then perhaps you need different equipment, something more suitable for our community standards. And what would that be? A shovel. Her eyes lit up. Actually, that would be an excellent solution. Manual snow removal is much quieter and allows for more precise placement. I felt my blood pressure rising. I have a 60-foot driveway and a 2-car wide area. Do you have any idea how long that would take to shovel? That's not my concern, Robert. My concern is maintaining the quality and standards of Riverside Meadows. Now, if there's nothing else, I have a conference call with our attorneys about several other code violations. She started to close the door and I put my hand up. Wait, this can't be enforceable. You can't dictate how fast I walk while clearing my own driveway. Section 14.7, Robert. It's all in the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your home. Have a good day. The door clicked shut. I walked back to my house, my mind racing. This was beyond ridiculous. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer when I got inside. Section 14.7 was real, but it was so vaguely worded that it could mean basically anything Margaret wanted it to mean. All exterior maintenance activities must be conducted in a manner consistent with community standards and with due consideration for neighboring properties. That was it. That was the entire section she was using to tell me my snow blower was too fast. I called Derek back. She told me to walk slower or use a shovel. You're kidding. I wish I was. She claims I'm going too fast and it's creating too much noise and throwing snow wrong. What are you going to do? An idea was forming in my head. Not a good idea necessarily, but an idea. I'm going to comply. What? I'm going to do exactly what she wants. I'm going to use a slower method. Rob, don't do anything stupid. Too late. I'm already in an HOA. I spent the rest of the morning researching. Then I called in sick to work, which wasn't entirely a lie because thinking about this situation was definitely making me feel ill. I drove to Home Depot and then to Harbor Freight. By noon, I had what I needed. The next snowfall came 3 days later on a Saturday morning. 6 more inches of fresh powder. Perfect. I waited until I saw Margaret's curtains twitch, knowing she was watching the neighborhood for violations. Then I went to my garage. Instead of my regular snow blower, I pulled out my new purchase. A small, electric, single-stage snow blower. The kind marketed for clearing sidewalks and small patios. It had about 1/8 the power of my regular machine and a clearing width of about 12 inches compared to my normal 24-inch path. But that wasn't even the best part. I'd modified my approach. I didn't just walk slower. I walked at an absolute snail's pace. I moved the little snow blower forward exactly 1 foot, then stopped, counted to 5. Moved it forward another foot, stopped, counted to 5. The noise was minimal. The snow was placed with ridiculous precision, and it was taking absolutely forever. Margaret's front door opened after about 20 minutes. She walked down her driveway toward me, arms crossed. "Good morning, Margaret," I called out cheerfully. I stopped my work and turned off the machine, just following your advice about using slower equipment. She looked at the tiny snow blower, then at my driveway, which was still about 80% covered in snow. "What are you doing?" "Complying with Section 14.7. This machine is much quieter, and as you can see, I'm being very careful about snow placement, walking at a very reasonable pace. Nothing excessive." "Robert, this is ridiculous. You've been out here for half an hour and barely cleared anything." "Well, you said I needed to slow down. I'm being mindful of the neighbors. No noise complaints this way." "How long is this going to take?" I looked at my driveway, doing some mental math. "At this pace, probably 3 hours, maybe 3.5, but I'll be in full compliance with community standards." Her face was turning red. "You're being deliberately difficult. I'm being deliberately compliant. There's a difference." "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work. The forecast says more snow tonight, and I want to make sure I have time to clear that too, slowly, with proper aesthetic consideration." I turned the machine back on and resumed my glacial pace. 1 foot forward, stop, count to 5. 1 foot forward, stop, count to 5. Margaret stood there for another minute, then stormed back to her house. Over the next hour, several neighbors came out to watch. Bill Henderson from across the street walked over, grinning. "Rob, what the hell are you doing?" "Following HOA guidelines, Bill, just being a good community member." "This is because of Margaret's email, isn't it?" "I have no idea what you mean. I'm simply using appropriate equipment at a reasonable pace." Bill laughed. "She's going to lose her mind." "Probably. But I'm not violating any rules." By hour 2, a small crowd had gathered. Sarah Chen from 2 houses down brought me a thermos of hot chocolate. Tom and Janet Morrison set up lawn chairs in their garage with the door open, watching like it was a sporting event. Someone started a timer. My phone started buzzing with texts. The neighborhood had an unofficial group chat that Margaret wasn't part of, and it was blowing up. "This is the best thing I've ever seen. How long has he been out there? Margaret looks like she's going to explode. I got video. This is going on YouTube." At the 2.5-hour mark, Margaret came back out, this time with her husband Carl in tow. Carl was a mild-mannered accountant who generally tried to stay out of his wife's HOA crusades. "Robert, this is absurd," Margaret said. "You need to use regular equipment and just clear your driveway like a normal person." I stopped and turned off the machine again. I'd actually started to work up a sweat despite the cold, partly from the physical effort and partly from trying not to laugh. "Margaret, I am using regular equipment. This is a legitimate snow blower, and I'm operating it at a slow, considerate pace exactly like you requested. I'm confused about what you want me to change. I want you to stop this nonsense and use your regular snow blower." "But you sent me an email specifically telling me my regular snow blower was too fast and didn't meet community standards." "I still have that email. Would you like me to forward it to the other board members?" Carl put his hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Honey, maybe we should go inside and talk about this." She shook him off. "No, this is completely unacceptable. Robert, I'm issuing you a warning right now. If you don't use appropriate equipment, you'll be fined." This is appropriate equipment. It's specifically designed for snow removal. And I'm being incredibly conscientious about noise levels and snow placement. Unless you'd like me to shovel instead. That would take even longer, though. Probably 5 or 6 hours. A small cheer went up from the Morrisons' garage. Margaret whirled around, just noticing the audience for the first time. Her face went from red to purple. All of you should be concerned about community standards, too. I think Rob's doing a great job, Bill called out. Very thorough, very careful. Excellent snow placement, Sarah added. Margaret looked like she was about to have a stroke. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. This isn't over, Robert. The board will hear about this. I'm sure they will. And they'll see that I'm in full compliance with all community guidelines. Now, I really need to finish. I'm only at the halfway point. She stormed off, Carl trailing behind her apologetically. I finished my driveway at the 3-hour and 7-minute mark. My back hurt, my arms were sore, and I was pretty sure I'd never been more satisfied with yard work in my entire life. The neighbors gave me a round of applause. Rob, you're a legend, Tom Morrison said, coming over to shake my hand. We've all wanted to stick it to Margaret for years. I'm not sticking it to anyone, just following the rules. Sure you are, Sarah said, grinning. And I'm sure you'll follow them again when it snows tonight. She was right. The forecast predicted another 4 to 6 inches overnight. I could barely wait. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board calling an emergency meeting for Monday night. Attendance was mandatory for me specifically. The email was from Margaret and copied the other 4 board members, Patricia Hughes, Donald Reed, Amy Martinez, and Steve Kowalski. I replied confirming my attendance and asking if I should bring documentation of my snow removal practices to demonstrate compliance with Section 14.7. Margaret's response was terse. Just be there. Sunday morning arrived with 5 inches of fresh snow. I set my alarm for 6, made a large pot of coffee, and prepared for round 2. This time I was ready. I charged my phone fully to document everything and had my thermos ready. At 6:15, I pulled out my tiny snow blower and resumed my methodical process. 1 foot forward. Stop. Count to 5. 1 foot forward. Stop. Count to 5. By 6:30, Margaret's door flew open. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers, her usually perfect hair in disarray. She'd clearly been watching for me. Robert Vance, stop this immediately. Good morning, Margaret. Just doing my part to maintain community standards. This is harassment. I stopped and looked at her calmly. Margaret, I'm clearing snow from my own driveway using legitimate equipment at a pace you specifically requested. How is that harassment? You're doing this to spite me. I'm doing this to comply with Section 14.7. If you have a complaint about my methods, please submit it in writing to the HOA board. Oh wait, you are the HOA board president, so I guess you can discuss it with yourself. This is going in my report for tomorrow's meeting. This is a violation of the Good Neighbor Policy. What Good Neighbor Policy? Section 3.2. Residents must conduct themselves in a manner befitting good neighbors, and clearing my snow quietly and carefully isn't befitting a good neighbor, she sputtered for a moment. You're being deliberately obtuse. No, I'm being deliberately compliant. There's a difference. This time, even more neighbors came out to watch. Word had spread on social media. Someone had posted the video from Saturday, and it had gotten thousands of views locally. The local news had even picked it up as a human interest story. Around hour 2, a news van pulled up. A reporter named Jessica Walsh from WGRM Channel 8 got out with a cameraman. Mr. Vance. Jessica Walsh, Channel 8 News. We'd love to talk to you about your snow removal situation. I stopped my work. Sure, happy to talk. Margaret came rushing out of her house, now fully dressed. "You can't film here. This is private property." "Madam, we're on a public street," Jessica said calmly. "We have every right to film. Are you the HOA president?" "Yes, and this man is violating community standards. By clearing his snow, by deliberately taking an excessive amount of time to do so." Jessica turned to me. "Mr. Vance, can you explain what's happening?" I pulled out my phone and showed her Margaret's original email. "The HOA president told me my regular snow blower was too fast and didn't meet community standards. So I got a slower one and I'm using it at a very careful pace. I'm just trying to comply with the rules." "And how long is this taking?" "About 3 hours per snowfall." "And how long did it take before?" 20 minutes. Jessica turned to Margaret. "Miss Pemberton, can you explain why a regular snow blower doesn't meet community standards?" Margaret's face was red again. "It's about noise and aesthetics. Residents have complained." "Which residents?" Bill Henderson called out from the growing crowd. "Because I never complained. Did any of you complain?" There was a chorus of no from the gathered neighbors. "This is a private community matter," Margaret snapped. "It's news when an HOA tells someone they're clearing snow too efficiently," Jessica said. "Mr. Vance, are you planning to continue this method?" "As long as the HOA requires it, absolutely. I believe in following the rules." The segment aired that night on the evening news. The headline was "HOA says snow blower too fast. Residents' malicious compliance goes viral." By Monday morning, it had been picked up by several national outlets. My phone was blowing up with messages from friends, former colleagues, and even some reporters from bigger networks. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 that evening. I arrived at 6:55 at the community clubhouse. About 40 other residents were already there, far more than usually attended these meetings. The 5 board members sat at a table in front, Margaret in the center, looking furious, flanked by Patricia, Donald, Amy, and Steve. Margaret called the meeting to order. "We're here to address the situation with Mr. Vance and his inappropriate snow removal practices." "Point of order," I said, standing up. "What specifically is inappropriate about my current snow removal practices?" "You're deliberately taking an excessive amount of time to clear your driveway." "I'm using a legitimate snow blower at a careful pace to minimize noise and ensure proper snow placement, exactly as requested in your email to me. I have copies of that email if anyone would like to see it." "I'd like to see it," Steve Kowalski said. He was a retired police officer and had always seemed reasonable in past meetings. I passed forward printed copies of Margaret's original email. The board members read it, and I saw Steve and Amy exchange glances. "Margaret," Amy Martinez said slowly, "this email does tell him to operate equipment more slowly." "I meant he should use his regular equipment more carefully, not buy a toy snow blower and take 3 hours." "That's not what the email says," Donald Reed pointed out. He was a lawyer and tended to be precise about language. "You specifically stated his current method was unacceptable and he needed to adjust his practices. He adjusted his practices. He's clearly doing this to be difficult. He's doing what you told him to do," Patricia Hughes said. She'd always been the most skeptical of Margaret's more extreme positions. "Margaret, I think we need to be honest here. Did anyone actually complain about his snow blower?" Mrs. Patterson did. "I talked to Mrs. Patterson," Patricia said. "She's 93 and complains about everything. Last week she complained that birds were chirping too early. We can't base policy on that." The room erupted in laughter and scattered applause. Margaret banged her gavel. "Order! This is serious. Mr. Vance is making a mockery of our community standards." "No," I said, standing up again. "I'm highlighting how ridiculous some of those standards are." Margaret, you've spent 6 years micromanaging every aspect of how we live in our own homes. The mailbox colors, the Christmas lights, the garden decorations, the number of cars in driveways, and now the speed at which we clear snow. It's absurd. We're homeowners, not inmates. A louder round of applause. I have documentation of every violation letter I've sent, Margaret said defensively. They were all valid under the bylaws. The bylaws that you interpret in whatever way suits your personal preferences, Bill Henderson called out. I move that we vote to remove the restrictions on snow removal equipment, Steve said. As long as work is done during reasonable hours, residents should be allowed to use whatever method they choose. Second, Amy said immediately. Margaret looked panicked. You can't just overturn established policy. We're the board, Patricia said. That's exactly what we can do. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Only Margaret stayed down. Motion passes, Patricia said. Mr. Vance, you're free to use whatever snow removal method you prefer. Another round of applause from the audience, but Margaret wasn't done. Fine. But I'm issuing a formal complaint about Mr. Vance's behavior under Section 3.2, the Good Neighbor Policy. His actions have been deliberately disruptive and caused media attention that reflects poorly on our community. Media attention that you caused by sending him an absurd email in the first place, Donald said. I move that we dismiss the complaint, Steve said. Second, Amy said again. All in favor, 4 hands. Margaret's face was scarlet. Margaret, Patricia said gently, maybe it's time to step back and let someone else be president for a while. You've served for 6 years. That's a long time. I'm not resigning. This community needs strong leadership. This community needs reasonable leadership, Bill called out. I nominate Patricia for president. I second that nomination, someone else called. Margaret stood up. You can't hold nominations right now. That's not on the agenda. Actually, Donald said, checking his laptop, according to the bylaws, board positions can be nominated and voted on at any general meeting with a quorum present. We definitely have a quorum. Margaret looked around at the packed room, then at her fellow board members. She could see she'd lost. Fine, do what you want. I resign from the board effective immediately. She grabbed her purse and stalked out of the clubhouse. The room burst into applause. Patricia looked a bit stunned. Well, okay then. I suppose we need to vote on a new president and a new board member. This is unexpected. The meeting continued for another hour. Patricia was elected president unanimously. They appointed Tom Morrison to fill Margaret's vacant board seat. One of their first actions was to form a committee to review all the HOA bylaws and eliminate or clarify the ones that were too vague or restrictive. As I was leaving, Steve Kowalski came over. Rob, that was well played. I've wanted to get rid of some of those ridiculous rules for years, but Margaret controlled everything. I just wanted to clear my driveway, he laughed. Sure. And I'm sure the 3-hour performances were just about compliance. Absolutely. I'm very committed to following the rules, even absurd ones. The next morning, I used my regular snow blower to clear the 2 inches that had fallen overnight. It took 18 minutes. It was glorious. But the story wasn't quite over. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Mr. Vance, this is Officer Hernandez from the Grand Rapids Police Department. We need to speak with you about an incident involving your HOA. My stomach dropped. What kind of incident? It's better if we discuss it in person. Can you come down to the station? An hour later, I was sitting in an interview room feeling like I'd done something wrong, even though I was pretty sure I hadn't. Officer Hernandez came in with a detective named Pierce. Mr. Vance, thanks for coming in. We want to ask you about Margaret Pemberton. Okay, what about her? When did you last have contact with her? at the HOA meeting Monday night. She resigned and I haven't seen or heard from her since. Why? The officers exchanged glances. We're investigating some financial irregularities with the Riverside Meadows HOA accounts. Your name came up as someone who's had recent conflicts with Miss Pemberton. Financial irregularities. We can't share details of an ongoing investigation, but we wanted to verify your interactions with her and the timeline of events. I explained everything, from the initial email about my snow blower to the meeting where she resigned. They took notes and asked several follow-up questions about who had access to HOA funds and how decisions were made. Is Margaret in trouble? I asked. We're investigating, Detective Pierce said carefully. If you think of anything else, please contact us. I left the station confused and concerned. When I got home, I immediately called Patricia. Patricia, the police just questioned me about Margaret and something about HOA finances. Oh God, I was hoping they'd keep it quiet for a few more days. Rob, we discovered something after Margaret resigned. Donald was looking through the HOA accounts to prepare a budget report, and he found a bunch of suspicious transactions. What kind of transactions? Money being paid to a landscaping company called Pemberton Property Services. Guess who owns that company? No, Margaret's brother, and he doesn't actually do any landscaping work. We've been paying him $2,500 a month for 3 years. That's $90,000 in fraudulent payments. Holy shit. There's more. She also authorized herself reimbursements for HOA-related expenses that were completely fabricated. Donald found receipts she doctored. We're talking about maybe $120,000 total that she's stolen from the HOA funds over the past 6 years. That's embezzlement. That's a felony. Donald called the police yesterday. They're building a case. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Margaret had been systematically stealing from the HOA almost from the beginning of her presidency. She'd hidden it by being aggressive about collecting dues and fines, so the account always looked healthy. But she'd been siphoning money into fake companies and reimbursing herself for expenses that never happened. The story made headlines again, this time more seriously. HOA president who complained about fast snow blower charged with embezzlement. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Margaret had been so focused on controlling every trivial detail of neighborhood life that no one had thought to question her financial management. In March, Margaret was formally charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. Her lawyer tried to work out a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in going easy. This wasn't a crime of poverty or desperation. This was someone in a position of trust stealing from her neighbors to fund a lifestyle she couldn't otherwise afford. The trial happened in August. I had to testify about the HOA's operations and Margaret's control over the board. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. The prosecution presented clear evidence of the fraudulent transactions, fake companies, and doctored receipts. Margaret's defense tried to argue that the money was legitimate reimbursement for her time and effort managing the HOA, but it fell flat. She'd never disclosed these payments to the board or the community, and many of the expenses she claimed were demonstrably fake. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. In September, Margaret was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus penalties and court costs. Her husband Carl, who apparently had no idea what she'd been doing, filed for divorce. Life in Riverside Meadows changed dramatically after Margaret's departure. Patricia's leadership style was collaborative rather than authoritarian. The new board eliminated about 40% of the bylaws, consolidating the rest into clear, reasonable standards. The ridiculous restrictions on mailbox colors, garden decorations, and snow removal methods were gone. The community actually started feeling like a community rather than a dictatorship. The national attention from the original snow blower story brought some interesting opportunities. I was interviewed on a few podcasts about HOA overreach and malicious compliance. A couple of websites wrote articles about the situation as an example of how homeowners can push back against unreasonable rules. Someone even made T-shirts that said, "My snow blower is too fast," with a picture of a tiny electric snow blower on them. I bought 3. Bill Henderson started a blog documenting absurd HOA rules from around the country. It got picked up by a major news outlet, and he ended up with a book deal. He dedicated a chapter to my snow blower story and the subsequent uncovering of Margaret's crimes. As for me, I went back to my normal life. I cleared my snow in winter using my regular 24-inch Toro snow blower at whatever pace I felt like walking. It usually took about 20 minutes. I put up Christmas lights without measuring their lumens or checking their placement with a ruler. I parked my car in my driveway for as many consecutive hours as I wanted. I lived in my house like a person who actually owned it. The following winter, we got hit with a massive storm that dropped 14 inches overnight. I woke up early, made coffee, and went out to start clearing my driveway with my regular snow blower. As I was working, I noticed several neighbors coming out to do the same. We waved to each other, helped clear each other's sidewalks where they intersected, and just acted like normal people being neighborly. Sarah Chen came over as I was finishing up. "Hey Rob, some of us are having a snowstorm party this afternoon. Food, drinks, cards. Wanna come? Sounds great." "What time?" "Around 4. Bring whatever you want." That afternoon, about 15 of us gathered at the Chen's house. We ate, drank, played cards, and told stories. Someone inevitably brought up the snow blower incident. "I still can't believe that was only a year ago," Tom Morrison said. "It feels like ancient history." "Best 3 hours I ever spent," I said, raising my beer. "To malicious compliance," Bill toasted. "To reasonable HOA boards," Patricia added. "To fast snow blowers," Sarah said, and everyone laughed. We sat around talking for hours, and I realized this was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. People who looked out for each other, helped each other, and didn't try to control every aspect of each other's lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. As I walked home that evening, I looked at my house. My driveway cleared of snow, my Christmas lights still up even though it was January 15th, and my car parked at a slightly irregular angle because I'd been in a hurry when I got home from work. None of it was perfect. But it was mine, and I could live in it the way I wanted. The snow blower incident taught me something important. Sometimes the best way to fight an unreasonable rule is to follow it exactly as written, without deviation, until its absurdity becomes impossible to ignore. Margaret probably thought she was putting me in my place with that email about my snow removal being too fast. Instead, she triggered a chain of events that ended her reign of terror, exposed her crimes, and freed an entire neighborhood from years of petty tyranny. All because she thought my snow blower was too fast. The next month, I got a call from a producer at a national morning show. They wanted to do a segment on HOA horror stories and were hoping I'd participate. I agreed, figuring the more attention we could bring to HOA overreach, the better. The interview aired on a Tuesday morning. I told the whole story, from the initial email to the 3-hour snow clearing performances to Margaret's arrest and conviction. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own HOA nightmares. Stories about being fined for having the wrong color flowers, threatened with liens for basketball hoops in driveways, and harassed about the breed of their dogs. It was clear that Margaret wasn't an isolated case. There were tyrants running HOAs all across the country, drunk on their tiny bit of power. But there were also messages of hope. People who'd successfully fought back against unreasonable rules, communities that had reformed their HOAs into actually useful organizations, board members who genuinely cared about making their neighborhoods better places to live rather than showcases for their control issues. I started collecting these stories and posting them on a website I created called HOA Accountability. It became a resource for homeowners dealing with overreach, with legal information, advice for pushing back, and examples of reasonable bylaws that other reformed HOAs had implemented. Patricia helped by contributing her experience transforming our board. The website got enough traffic that I was able to monetize it with ads, which I used to fund a legal assistance program. We connected homeowners fighting unreasonable HOA actions with lawyers willing to do pro bono work or reduced fee consultations. It wasn't going to solve the whole problem, but it was something. In March, I attended a city council meeting where they were discussing new regulations for HOAs operating within Grand Rapids city limits. The catalyst was, naturally, Margaret's case. The council wanted to implement oversight requirements to prevent future embezzlement and abuse. I testified about my experience and the need for transparency in HOA operations. Several other residents from various neighborhoods shared similar stories. The council passed new regulations requiring annual independent audits of HOA finances, mandatory disclosure of all board decisions to residents, and limits on the types of fines HOAs could impose. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. And it probably wouldn't have happened without the media attention from a story about a snow blower being too fast. By summer, Riverside Meadows had fully transformed. The annual meeting that year had actual contested elections for board positions, with people genuinely interested in serving rather than controlling. The budget was transparent and posted online. Decisions were made collaboratively. We still had rules about maintaining properties and common areas, but they were reasonable rules that actually helped maintain property values rather than petty regulations about gnome placement. One Saturday in June, the neighborhood held its first annual block party. Patricia had organized it, getting approval from the city to close off our main street for the afternoon. We had grills set up, music playing, and kids running around playing games. Margaret's old house had sold to a young couple with a baby. They were nice people, completely unaware of the drama that had happened before they moved in. Well, they knew some of it from the news, but they didn't know it was specifically that house. I decided not to tell them. Everyone deserves a fresh start. As I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, Derek showed up. He'd driven over from his neighborhood to check out our party. "Rob, this is great. Your neighborhood actually looks fun now. Turns out when you let people live their lives, they generally do okay. Still glad you didn't move out." I looked around at my neighbors, people who'd become actual friends over the past year. "Yeah, I'm glad. This is home." Even with the HOA is different now. It's actually useful. They maintain the common areas, organize events, and handle legitimate issues. But they're not trying to control what color I paint my shutters or how fast I clear my snow. Derek grabbed a beer from the cooler. "To fast snow blowers." "To fast snow blowers," I agreed. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, I helped Patricia clean up. "Thanks for organizing this," I said. "This is exactly what the neighborhood needed." Thank you for having the guts to stand up to Margaret. None of this would have happened if you just quietly switched to a shovel like she wanted. I can be stubborn when the situation calls for it. Stubbornness and malicious compliance. Powerful combination. That night, I sat on my back deck with a beer, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. Kids laughing, someone's music playing softly, a dog barking in the distance. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted a review of Riverside Meadows on a real estate site. Great neighborhood with reasonable HOA. Board is responsive and regulations are fair. Would definitely recommend. 5 stars. A year ago, our reviews had been full of complaints about overzealous enforcement and a power-hungry president. Now we were getting 5-star reviews, all because I'd spent 3 hours clearing my driveway with a tiny snow blower. The following winter was unusually mild. We only got a few significant snowfalls, and I cleared them all with my regular snow blower at my regular pace. Nobody complained. Nobody timed me. Nobody sent emails about aesthetics or noise levels. It was blissfully boring. In February, I got a letter from the Michigan Attorney General's office. They were investigating HOA practices statewide in the wake of several high-profile cases, including Margaret's. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify at hearings about potential state-level regulations. I agreed, and in March I found myself in Lansing at the state capitol, telling my story to a committee of legislators. My testimony was brief, but impactful. I explained how vague bylaws and unchecked authority had allowed Margaret to control every aspect of our lives while simultaneously stealing from us. I advocated for clear standards, mandatory transparency, and real oversight. Other homeowners testified too, sharing stories from across Michigan. An elderly man who'd been threatened with foreclosure over the color of his mailbox flag. A single mother fined repeatedly for her children's toys being visible in the yard. A veteran who'd been told his American flag didn't meet size requirements. The legislators seemed genuinely shocked by some of the stories. Several of them admitted they lived in HOA communities and had no idea how bad it could get. The committee drafted legislation that would become known as the HOA Accountability Act. It required regular financial audits, limited the types of regulations HOAs could enforce, established a clear appeals process for violations, and created real penalties for board members who abused their authority. The bill passed both chambers with bipartisan support and was signed by the governor in May. It would take effect January 1st of the following year, giving HOAs time to come into compliance. I watched the signing ceremony online from my office at work. It was surreal to think that my petty dispute about snow removal speed had ultimately led to statewide reform. But maybe that was how change happened. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people refusing to accept unreasonable treatment. That summer, I got an email from a documentary filmmaker. She was producing a film about HOA overreach in America and wanted to feature my story. I agreed, and she came out in July to film interviews with me, Patricia, Donald, and several other neighbors. The documentary, called Homeowner's Hostage, premiered at a film festival in September and was picked up by a streaming service. It told stories from across the country, but mine was the centerpiece. The arc from ridiculous snow blower complaint to malicious compliance to embezzlement exposure to legislative reform made for compelling storytelling. The film got positive reviews and sparked a national conversation about HOA governance. Several other states started considering similar legislation to Michigan's. Homeowner advocacy groups formed. The national discourse around HOAs began to shift, and I went back to my regular life. I worked at the engineering firm, hung out with friends, dated occasionally, and maintained my house. Normal stuff. Boring stuff. Exactly what I'd wanted when I bought the place. 3 years after the snowblower incident, Riverside Meadows celebrated its 50th anniversary as a community. The celebration was held at a local park, with current and former residents invited. Even some of the original homeowners from the 1970s showed up. I was talking to one of them, a man named Frank who'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years before retiring to Florida. "It's changed a lot," he said, looking at photos from the old days. "But it's nice to see people actually seem happy here now." It wasn't always happy. The HOA's been through phases. Started out fine, just basic maintenance stuff. Then about 20 years ago, it started getting stricter. By the time I left, it was getting ridiculous. I heard it got even worse after that. It did, but it's better now. I heard about that whole thing with Margaret and the snow blower. That was you, right? Guilty as charged. He laughed and shook my hand. Good for you, son. Sometimes you have to be willing to look a little ridiculous to make a point. You cleared snow for 3 hours to prove she was being absurd. That takes commitment, or stubbornness. Best kind of commitment is stubborn commitment. As the party continued, I reflected on how much had changed. Margaret was serving her time in prison, scheduled for release in another year with good behavior. Carl had moved to another state. Their house had been sold to cover restitution and legal fees. The HOA board was functioning well, with regular turnover and genuine elections. The bylaws were clear and reasonable. The neighborhood was actually pleasant to live in. Property values had increased, partly because of the improvements we'd made and partly because word had gotten out that we were one of the good HOAs now. My website, HOA Accountability, was still running and had helped hundreds of homeowners navigate disputes with their boards. The legal fund had grown substantially through donations, and we'd assisted in several successful challenges to unreasonable regulations. The Michigan HOA Accountability Act had been in effect for over a year and was working well. Other states were implementing similar laws. The national conversation about HOA governance continued, all because Margaret thought my snow blower was too fast. As I drove home from the anniversary celebration that evening, I passed my driveway and smiled. It was summer, so there was no snow to clear. But my snow blower was in the garage, ready for winter. The regular one. The fast one. The one that let me clear my driveway in 20 minutes like a reasonable person. I pulled into the driveway, parked at whatever angle felt right, and walked into my house. My house. Not the HOA's house. Not Margaret's house. Mine. And that was exactly how it should be.